You guys want to watch the Democratic presidential debates? You excited? You excited to see who the real president's gonna be? You guys excited? Is it gonna? I think it's gonna be Dean Phillips, of course. You know, me and all the kids are talking about how handsome Dean Phillips looks in his suit. And how we're gonna vote for him because he's just so darn cute. Okay, let's watch. So, you know how there's the Republican presidential debates, and they're just the Republican runner-up debates. That's what they are. As in, most likely Donald Trump's going to be the nominee, so all the people that are debating on the debate stage, it's basically the Republican runner-up contest. This is the Democratic version of this, where the nominee is going to be Joe Biden. So this is just 3 people running for the runner-up silver medal. Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and Cenk Uygur. All 3 of them, though, are running because they don't think that Biden can beat Trump. And that's why they're continuing to run, even though their odds are basically impossible. Cenk Uygur makes the least sense to me because he has such a terrible electioneering record. Not electioneering, but election record. He ran race, lost it, got 5% in the congressional race. There's questions on if he can even be president of the United States. And he said he's running because he just wants somebody to run against Biden, who has a progressive agenda. But Marianne Williamson's already running. He could have just endorsed her. Him running confuses me. But at least I understand the general logic as to why they're running, even if I still probably disagree with it. Buffalo Johnson, thank you for gifting 5 tier 1 subs. To Gray Fox, Danabo, Debate Bra, Ouija, and Aaron Cranston, 1999. Thank you. Let's watch this debate.
Election coverage.
It's only fair we watch the Democratic runner-up if we're going to watch the Republican runner-up.
The final election coverage, depending on how the 2024 general election goes. Stay tuned to find out. But tonight on our coverage, we are going to be hosting the Democratic presidential candidates to respond to tonight's Republican debate. And we are very proud as a network to...
Okay, I'm going to just let this run. I'm going to go get something to drink, and we'll be back and we'll watch it together, boys. Treasure Mancer, thank you so much for the gifted tier 1. Thanks for all the gifted subs, boys. I do appreciate it. It really does support the channel. Thank you.
Be the first to bring together all of the contenders at the same place at the same time. And we want to point out that we did invite President Joe Biden, but as unfortunately been the trend, he and the Democratic establishment seem to prefer that this primary be silent if it has to occur at all. But I don't think that silence is good for a democracy, so we've decided to give our microphone to the candidates. And now let's welcome those candidates. Marianne Williamson is an American author and speaker. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Good to be speaking with you once again. Representative Dean Phillips is a businessman who has represented Minnesota's 3rd congressional district since 2019. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody.
Good to have you here. Cenk Uygur is a political commentator, host of The Young Turks, and author. Cenk, it is good to meet you for the first time ever.
All right, good to be here.
Good to have you here. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing tonight. This is not a debate. This is a forum. We are hoping to bring together all of the contenders to get an idea of what they think about politics and exchange of ideas. And to that end, because there's a lot that we're going to be talking about, we would ask that all of you try to be concise in your answers to make sure that we can cover as many important topics as possible. And with that said, I want to start off with sort of the context that this forum occurs in. We just had the 4th Republican debate. There will likely be more. And yet on the Democratic side, no debates. Is that a big loss for democracy? Is it a loss for the Democratic Party? Marianne, I want to start with you. What do you think about this?
It's a big loss, and we have something worse going on now than just the fact that we don't have debates. We have the fact that in Florida and possibly in some other states as well, there's some, as I'm sure Cenk and Dean are aware, there's some funny stuff going on in Tennessee and in North Carolina. I'm thinking of it now as Ballotgate. So we have a bigger problem than even the fact that they're not having debates. And that's that there is a concerted effort by Democratic parties around the country to make sure that Joe Biden is basically the only person running, even to the point of excluding us from the ballots. And that's a very big deal. And yes, it's a threat to our democracy.
Representative?
And for me, well, my goodness, how can you have the 2 leading candidates right now, which is going to change, by the way, hopefully on both sides of the aisle, literally not agreeing to debate? It's just absurd. Donald Trump not showing up for a GOP debate. It is not, there's not even an incumbent GOP president right now. And I think it's more than anything sad, and a sad commentary on the Democratic Party and sadly on Joe Biden, that he would, before he even knew who might be running in this primary, would say there would be no debates. And as a Democrat, a proud one, I know I'm with other ones here on this Zoom tonight, if debate dies, democracy dies. It's as simple as that. It's appalling, but I'm glad to be with all of you, and we're going to show people not just how to debate, but how to do it respectfully and in a way that I think.
I'm going to be for real. There usually isn't a debate for the person who's already won. If you won once, then that's usually not something you have to worry about until the general. That's been the general standard. Now, you can be upset with that general standard, and you could say that I wish that even the people who are sitting incumbent presidents would have these presidential debates in the primary and then in the general as well. In fact, I might even agree with you. Okay, but that is how it usually works.
America's demanding.
Cenk, what do you think?
Yeah, first, I want to say something about Marianne and Dean. Marianne Williamson has been in this race longer than anybody. Showed tremendous courage by getting in from the beginning. And then Dean coming in when he did was also huge. It brought more attention to the weakness of Joe Biden, and he did it while taking on huge parts of the Democratic establishment that were very unhappy for him doing that. I think it showed tremendous courage on both of their parts, and I want to commend them for that. Now, unfortunately for Joe Biden, we haven't seen that kind of courage. I guess he's worried about us because it's not just that he doesn't debate us.
Oh, dude, I'm sure Biden, man, he is fucking under the covers shivering, saying, is Cenk Uygur gonna get, is Cenk gonna get me? Like, come on, dude. I'd be surprised if Joe Biden actually knows your name. I would not be surprised if he didn't.
And come on, I mean, we see his state. I'm sorry, but he couldn't. And if you're worried that he can't withstand a debate with us, how's he going to do against Donald Trump? But more importantly, as Marianne pointed out, now Florida's just canceled their election. Look, we all got into this race because we're worried to death that Donald Trump is going to end democracy as we know it. And he now is bragging about wanting to be a dictator. So the Democratic Party ending elections in the primaries is an epic disaster. It's a disaster for the Democratic voters. It's a disaster for the process and a disaster for our prospects in the general election. How are you going to make the case that Donald Trump is endangering democracy when you're canceling elections across the country? Now North Carolina and Tennessee has taken all three of us off the ballot as well. It's outrageous, it's indefensible, and it's not what the Democratic Party should stand for.
And I'd like to remind our audience, as we often have, that when you don't have contested, vigorous primaries, sure, maybe you protect the incumbent at least through the primary process, but you don't have a period of driving news, of getting people fired up, getting people talking about politics in these different states, and that almost certainly has lingering effects for the general election. But I want to jump onto something that Representative Phillips mentioned there, that you not only have Biden opting out of the debates, but as Representative Phillips mentioned, Trump also isn't getting involved. So I want to jump to our first bit of video from the debate where Chris Christie pointed out how weird it was that in these debates they're basically pretending that it doesn't matter that Trump isn't there.
It's often very difficult to be the only person on the stage who's telling the truth and the only person who is taking on what needs to be taken on. I look at my watch now. We're 17 minutes into this debate, and except for your little speech in the beginning, we've had these three acting as if the race is between the four of us. The fifth guy, who doesn't have the guts to show up and stand here, he's the one who, as you just put it, is way ahead in the polls. The fact is that when you go and you say the truth about somebody who is a dictator, a bully, who has taken shots at everybody, I'm in this race because the truth needs to be spoken. He is unfit. This is a guy who just said this past week that he wants to use the Department of Justice to go after his enemies when he gets in there. I mean, the fact of the matter is he is unfit to be president, and there is no bigger issue in this race, Megyn, than Donald Trump, and those numbers prove it.
So as we've been saying, Joe Biden doesn't want to have debates, doesn't want in many of these states to have a primary at all, despite saying that he got into this race to stop Donald Trump. He's not taking the opportunity to get the cameras on him, talk about Trump and all of that. And Trump doesn't.
Hey, thank you so much for the primer, Duggo Sorex. I don't know. I'm just gonna say Doug. Thanks for the prime, Doug.
Doesn't feel like he has to show up. But I want to start with you, Representative Phillips, first on this. As of right now, Biden is still leading, and Trump is also leading. So is this a problem of the candidates, or is this a problem of the electorate, that we don't seem to have high enough standards for our candidates, that we expect that they should at least try to sell us on them?
Well, we just suck, sir. It's just we all suck. Joe Biden just is better than all of us. We just suck. I want to see some brutal honesty.
Actually, I think this is a problem of two parties.
Okay, well, that answer's okay too.
And I think it's becoming self-evident to those of us here on the Zoom tonight. But I don't think it's evident enough yet to the country that they're being played by a duopoly that is literally suffocating democracy. Sadly, I thought it was only a disease of the right, as I know Marianne has discovered earlier than I, and Bernie Sanders before us. It's actually a disease that's afflicting the left as well. And I think we have to expose it. Look
One
forward
of
to
the
working.
things that Dean Phillips have been saying recently is, wow, I was so wrong. They did steal it from Bernie in 2016. I've been seeing him say that a few times. He's a pretty centrist candidate, Dem, so I think that was an attempt to try to appeal to any disaffected Bernie voters, former Bernie voters.
Together to do so. I've discovered also that the electorate is desperate. They're hungry, starving for debate, but they're not going to get it from the two parties. The two parties are actually working against it. And look, from my perspective, when 70-some% of the country wants neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump to be the two nominees, and only one member of Congress out of 535 people, which is me, is willing to say that quiet part out loud, that's all that you need to know about the disconnect between the electorate and the representatives. We have a perverse incentive system. It is corrupt. I'm finding more out by the day. And that's why I'm glad we're doing this. And I think we should all work together.
Man, do people really want debates? Is that something people want? Maybe I should have stayed on hippy dippy. Maybe I should have just waited for the market upswing. I haven't noticed that market upswing yet. I haven't noticed it. And if people want debates, what kind of debates do people want? Do they want the debates like this? How many views did this get? 27,000. I mean, I'm not trying to. 27,000 is good for a YouTuber my size, but I mean, Young Turks is 5.68 million. I'm just saying.
And it's not just Democrats. The leading candidates should debate, period. It should be a basic expectation, a quality.
I do wish debate was more like this, like uninterrupted, boom, 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 boom. And it wasn't as much of, so performative and grandstanding, but I'm sure this will get performative in a moment.
To even enter the presidential stage, period. And it's enough of the nonsense. Doesn't matter your politics. It's a principle.
And it certainly seems like something that had always been a part of the tradition. And we know, based on recent polling, 68% say inside of the Democratic Party they want televised debates. Cenk, I want to go to you next. What do you think about this?
Yeah. So look, obviously we should debate. I think that, and if we do, Dean is right, Marianne is right. What we would do is talk about how terrible Trump is, for example. So not only did he say he'd be dictator on day one, but he shared an article from the Washington Post that said that he would become a dictator. He shared it favorably. Hey, look at this, guys. I'm going to be a dictator. It's unbelievable. He said that immigrants were poisoning the blood of our nation. That is a direct Hitler quote. So he's going to, and Kash Patel and Steve Bannon were on their show the other day saying, we're not kidding. They're going to take political prisoners. They are saying that they're going to arrest their opponents in politics and in media, and they have not laid out.
Honestly, the moment that I knew that there was not a point of return for Donald Trump was when he said publicly that the U.S. Constitution should be suspended so that they give the presidency to him. That was the moment where I was like, if they don't drop him after, what standard could he be held to? If the sacred document of the country, but especially the sacred document to the Republican Party, is just so easily discarded and forgotten. And hearing statements like that causes basically zero concern from within the Republican establishment.
Without any specific charges. In other words, we don't care that they didn't do anything wrong. They dared to criticize Donald Trump. We're going to arrest them. This is a massive, massive danger to our democracy. This is not a normal election. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is hiding. Look, whether you're debating us or you're out there on the stump making the case, You've got to show up if you're going to be the candidate. And he hasn't even showed up. That's why his favorability is at 37. His unfavorability is at 59. He's 22 points underwater. He's 13 points lower than a generic Democrat, which the three of us or any other Democrat would fill that slot. 13 points lower. He's losing to Donald Trump, who is a deeply unpopular politician who says he wants to be dictator. He's losing to Trump in the last poll.
By the way, I don't know if Cenk would fill that generic Democrat slot, because it's something to be said generic Democrat. It's another thing to actually fill it with a face. And I don't know if betting on the person who's ran in one election and lost overwhelmingly and has no election experience, and is mostly known for being a rhetorical firebrand candidate, but has no national, there's no national knowledge of Cenk. Like, he has a show, but just not on the same scale as any of the other candidates.
By 8 points. And the Democratic candidate must win by 5 in order to win the Electoral College. Then there's that number again. Joe Biden down by 13. And when you're down by 13, you need to be in front of every camera.
Down by 13. Down by 13 in which poll? I assume he's string picking polls, because I saw a poll yesterday that had Biden up by 1. Everything looks very close right now, but we're also a year out from the election. We don't know what it's going to be like on election day. We don't know how the economy is going to be like from a year from now, for sure. We don't know what's going to be the hot button issues a year from now. We don't know what the foreign policy situation is going to look like. We don't know how Trump's cases are going to progress from a year from now. The idea that we could say, oh, he's down 15 points in the poll. I mean, I have no clue which poll he's even citing. He's down 15 points in the polls. He cannot win. It's impossible he can win. I don't know. He's just cherry picking. I think he's just cherry picking. I think he's cherry picking to make his case stronger. And again, I'm not saying that Biden is going to win. I'm just saying that the doomsday scenario that Cenk is laying out based upon polling data is not borne out in the polling data.
Fighting like hell to come back. Does it look like Joe Biden's trying to make a comeback? No, he's constantly taking a nap in a cave somewhere, in a bunker. And what does he do? He sends out his minions to stop elections in the primaries, stop debates, stop any discussion. Well, then we're not getting our message out. We as Democrats, you should be joining us in fighting Trump and fighting like hell to represent Democratic voters. Do you see any of that energy and gumption from Joe Biden? Honestly, he barely can finish sentences. Look, guys, if you could, I don't mind if people are angry with me for saying things that are obviously true. You ask anyone in your private life, what do you think of Joe Biden? Every single one of them is going to say he's too old. But yet the Democratic Party is supporting this leader who's acting in authoritarian ways, is saying we're okay with losing democracy. We're okay with
authoritarian ways. Can we fucking diet down, drama queen?
Losing this election to Donald Trump, as long as we don't offend Joe Biden. Well, the three of us don't agree. And I think that Joe Biden needs to actually make his case to the American people. And he hasn't even done that against us or Trump.
Marianne, I know you've been very critical of the lack of debates and what they're doing at the primaries. You started off talking about that. Is this just fear from Biden? Is it apathy? Is it entitlement? Is it disrespect for the democratic process? Why have we ended up with the sort of democratic primary, or lack thereof, that there is right now?
Cenk keeps reusing a poll from a couple months ago. Yeah, that makes sense, because all the recent polls I've seen are it's 4 to maximum down 5 points. But I've seen polls where he's up 3. So it's just I haven't seen the polls that he's talking about. I never saw down 15, period. But it certainly hasn't been recent. But he keeps saying that number, and I've heard him say it before. So maybe it's old, but I just think he's cherry picking. I just think he doesn't want to let go of the point, because the point sounds rhetorically good.
Marianne, I think that you might be muted.
First of all,
she wants to run the country, can't even run her mic. I don't know about that, Chief.
exactly what Cenk said. It's that the president doesn't feel he needs to say anything because he knows that he has a machine that's taking care of business for him. And that's a problem. And that is the DNC and how the whole party operates in state after state after state, making sure we're not on the ballots, making sure that we're not debating the president, et cetera. And everything that Cenk said was true. We need to be out there talking about our counter narrative to the Republicans. We need to talk about what the Democrats stand for in 2024. What does Biden say other than finish the job? But there's something else as well. And that's a sort of disturbing psychological characteristic of too many Democratic voters. You know, we've been trained to keep our political conversation so shallow that even in the Democratic Party, we sort of farm out our critical thinking. There's this parroting of these pale, stale platitudes. We are going to vote for Joe Biden. He won before, therefore he'll win again, which to me is like saying to an actor, you won the Oscar last year, so surely you'll win it this year, when it's a different movie this year. So I find it disturbing that so many...
got a Tier 1 subscription. Aris 385 asterisk got a Tier 1 asterisk subscription.
Hey, thanks for the Tier 1. I appreciate it.
Many Democrats who consider themselves so concerned about democracy are treating Dean and Cenk and myself like we're doing something wrong. You know, I'm old enough to remember when Eugene McCarthy primaried Lyndon Johnson, and when Bobby Kennedy Sr. Primaried Lyndon Johnson. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives some special assignation to incumbency. And when those men ran against Lyndon Johnson, and it was very important that they did because that helped end the Vietnam War, nobody thought it was weird. We just thought it was democracy. So Democratic voters and the fact that they're willing to go along with this craziness from the DNC, I hope more of them will wake up and remember that there's nothing in the Constitution or even in our traditions, contrary to what they would have you believe, that would indicate that it's the DNC that should be making this decision. Rather, it is the people and the people alone who should be making this decision. And if they did, and they really heard Cenk and really heard Dean and heard me in the debates, I think that Joe Biden would have some serious contenders. And I think that that's what he's really afraid of.
I heard you, Marianne. I agree with a lot of what you said, including on the Oscars. I would love for Brendan Fraser and Michelle Yeoh to win again, but I don't think that it's going to happen, unfortunately. But I'll be tuning in. In any event, there was references to going a little bit deeper, so I want to get into the first real back and forth that we saw at that debate, which was Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, and I believe.
Here's the thing, though. Then this is the problem with everything that Marianne said. None of them have been able to get Robert F. Kennedy Jr. numbers. None of them have been able to get Kennedy numbers because none of them are a Kennedy except for the actual fucking Kennedy. And that Kennedy is, I mean, he has less brains than the President Kennedy. That's saying something.
Vivek Ramaswamy got involved in this too, talking about corporate influence on candidates and on policy. And so, Cenk, I want to start with you first. We've been talking a lot about the Democratic status quo, the Democratic establishment, which is not just about an approach to primaries. It's also about the approach to corporations, campaign finance, corporate PACs. What do you think about this? How is it influencing your candidacy, and would it influence your presidency?
Yeah, so I believe none of us are taking corporate PAC money, and that is a giant part of the corruption in this system. So I think probably Representative Phillips can talk to how much call time you have to do to just get reelected into Congress and get elected the first time. Everybody's constantly pleading with rich folks, corporations, et cetera, super PACs, dark PACs, dark money PACs for money. This is insane. This is legalized bribery. So, you know, the one thing, and Vivek Ramaswamy is unbearable, but the one thing that he was right about is, yes, it's corruption when you work in government and then you go and work for one of the giant corporations that you were helping when you were in government, as Nikki Haley did with Boeing, and you funnel money to them when you're in government, and then you get the rewards, and you get millions of dollars from them when you leave government, and then you go back into government and you funnel them our money, though. You're not funneling them their money. You're funneling our money to them, right? And so, and to the tune of billions, and sometimes with the defense contractors and the pharmaceutical companies, trillions of dollars. So, and I wish the Democratic Party was immune from this, but it isn't. And so the Democratic establishment takes tons of corporate PAC money. I believe Joe Biden has taken about $150 million from dark money PACs. So do we think that you take $150 million and that you're not affected by that at all. That you're like, oh no, somebody gave me all that money, and that's the source of my power. That's how I can say, hey,
I'm as much as, you know, it's good to see pressure on, you know, government corruption. It's good to see pressure on impact control of government influence. You know, I would love to see more people talk about public financing of elections and experimenting with that and seeing if we can make our democracy a little bit more pure and focusing on the interests of everyday people. This just feels like a TYT segment. This doesn't feel like a debate. Like, there's no. Do they debate? I wonder if they're. We'll see debate. They'll have to debate stuff. It's a debate. They have to debate.
More electable because I have so much more money. But that doesn't affect you? That you're not going to do something to try to get that money? No, I'm sorry, but I don't believe that. So, yes, Mitch McConnell's taken about $1 billion in donations from rich people and corporations throughout his career, and that is obviously corrupt, and any Democrat will tell you that's corrupt.
He has the same problem that I do. I have so much information that I want to get out about a topic that I overshare when he should be keeping it shorter and punchier.
Rob?
But I mean, hey, it's the TYT presidential debates. He's the TYT host, right? He wants the mic. They're going to give him the mic.
But Nancy Pelosi has also taken $1 billion from donors. And so this is systemic. It isn't that Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi are evil, although with Mitch McConnell there is a good case to be made. But it is the system that is wrong. And so that's what we've got to attack. And unfortunately, most of the politicians and most of the media don't address this at all. And I'll add one thing to Marianne's analogy about the Oscars. You know, if you do it about anything else, it makes no sense at all. Biden was 15 points higher the last time Trump and Biden squared off. He was at 52 points. He's now at 37. He's got to make up 15 points. It's not the same as last time. And he barely won by 44,000 votes in 3 swing states last time. It's like saying, and that was about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Tampa won the Super Bowl. The Buccaneers would stand no chance of winning the Super Bowl today. It's absurd to say, oh, yeah, same thing. It's not the same thing. And we could tell from Biden's demeanor as well that it's been a long 3 years.
I'm going to just throw out one more. We asked everybody to keep their answers concise, but also if you could keep your political metaphors to being about movies rather than sports, I would really prefer that. I can't speak to the audience, but Marianne, what do you think about this? The corruption, the corporate influence?
Well, we all know that money in politics is the cancer that underlies all the other cancers. We have to become as intentional about overturning Citizens United. Some Americans were intentional about overturning Roe v. Wade for many years. We also ultimately, we need a constitutional amendment that will establish public funding for federal campaigns.
Hey, look at that.
All the revolving door issues that Cenk talked.
That's not something I'm against. See, this is the thing. I actually kind of like Marianne. I think out of all the if I had to vote for Cenk, Marianne, or Dean Phillips, it's a decent chance I'd vote for Marianne.
Are absolutely correct.
I agree with a lot of the policy, like the broad policy recommendations. I don't know enough about her specifics.
But even if it weren't for that money, just the fact that if you look at the cost of getting on these ballots alone, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars, so even that's in addition to all the shenanigans that they're doing now, the system is rigged so that no one who doesn't either have a lot of money or access to a lot of money it has any chance of getting near the pinnacles of power. So then the American people wonder why our legislators aren't passing laws that actually serve the people. That's because in the vast majority of the cases, they're not from what we think of as the constellation of average Americans who are living through average American things. And also, Dean, I don't mean...
Cenk seems a little cold on the Ukraine issue. Yeah, it's part of the reason I want to vote for Cenk. It's cold on the Ukraine issue. Marianne, from what I've heard, is better than Cenk on Ukraine.
To be putting you on the spot here, I really don't. This is an honest question. But Cenk said that you weren't. And what is Steve Schmidt doing? And what is the PAC situation with you? I do think it's a reasonable question.
Oh, happy to address that. Let me start with my overarching comment on campaign finance reform, because
does it not bother you that Marianne has no political experience? Well, Cenk also has no political experience outside of political commentary. The only one in this room that has political experience is Dean Phillips, and Dean Phillips is, I mean, I don't want to Dean Phillips is he's John Leahy, man. He's fucking John Leahy.
It is the cancer of all cancers. And Cenk, you asked the question about call time in Congress. 10,000 hours per week collectively is what members of Congress spend raising money. And I'm going to tell you the dirty little secret. Not only does all that money buy access and influence, of course it does, but what it really is so troubling is that when you spend all your time with people who have money, the well-to-do and the well-connected, by definition, you're not spending time with the broad cross-section of Americans that are struggling. I watched that debate tonight. I was astounded that they barely talked about affordability. They barely talked about healthcare. They barely talked about housing. They barely talked about education. And that's because members of Congress and all the political class right now are spending so much of their time with the wealthy and the well-connected that they have completely lost touch with what's going on in this country. Are we surprised that we have Trumpism? We shouldn't be. And I'm the only.
Dean Phillips is a self-financed campaign, so he's independently wealthy, so he can use that as an advantage to be like, I don't need to get that type of financing.
Member of Congress, the only one out of 535 that takes no PAC money of any kind, no lobbyist money. I don't take member money. I don't give it, and I don't have a leadership PAC. I think that's how the whole game should be played. I raise enough money for my congressional races from individual donors to make it work. But that's the system. And by the way, until the rules can change, people are going to have to play by them. As for Steve Schmidt, he helped me start my campaign because you know why? I couldn't find a single Democratic consultant to work on my campaign when I launched because they are all going to be blackballed by the establishment. Steve Schmidt was the only person who is so committed to defeating Donald Trump. He said, I'll help you get there. He volunteered to do it, left my campaign right after I launched. He's doing his own thing, I think, very similar to the Lincoln Project, to simply defeat Donald Trump. And I think that's his mission once again. He said in 2020, Biden was the only one that could do it. In 2024, he thinks I'm the one to do it. And that's, I'm thrilled that he's got that faith in me. I believe I can too, but that's the dirty little secret. It is so appalling and so abhorrent. And that's what people should know. 10,000 hours per week raising money. I can't find someone to go to dinner with in Washington on a Wednesday night, because everybody's going to PAC dinners, getting their white envelopes with the $5,000 2-3 times a night. That's the truth.
Wow. Well,
that's part of why it's so. I'm sorry.
No, continue.
Well, that's why it's so crazy when people say you have to be an experienced politician. It's such a Wizard of Oz imagery about what's going on in Washington. Oh, you have to be one of them because they know what they're doing. No, they spend most of their time raising money, just as Dean just said.
Yeah. Well, perhaps it is a good qualification, since when you get into office, that's mostly the only thing they want you to do at that point. But I think, you know, we've got a little bit of time before our first break. I want to jump into the first bit of foreign policy that came up during this debate. So we're going to play a little bit of Ron DeSantis answering a question about what's going on with Hamas, Israel, and the situation in Gaza.
We have to look out for our people. When there are hostages, Commander-in-Chief, you have to do whatever you can to get them done. But the overall issue with this is this administration is trying to hobble Israel from being able to defend itself. They have a right to eliminate Hamas and win a total and complete victory so that they never have to deal with this again. Hamas wants nothing less than a second Holocaust. They would wipe off every single Jew off the map. They would destroy the state of Israel if we could. Joe Biden will say they support Israel, and then they do nothing but try to kneecap them every step of the way. You should not try to direct their war effort. We should work together with them so that they can bring Hamas to heel.
So there, Ron DeSantis was pretty clear that he doesn't think there should be effectively any limitations on what Israel does in pursuit of Hamas in Gaza. Now, the context, too, though, was he was asked a specific question about whether he would allow for U.S. forces to be used in Gaza, and he didn't want to answer that, and that was actually pointed out by Chris Christie. So why don't we play a little bit of that?
This is the problem with the first three debates. Ron gets asked a question and he doesn't answer it. Your question was very specific. You said, would you send American troops as commander-in-chief? And he went on to this minute and 30-second hosanna about his knowledge of the military and what we need to do, and didn't answer your question. Look, when you're president of the United States, you're not going to have a choice whether to answer that question or not. Your generals, your secretary of defense, your secretary of state, debate, your national security advisor are going to present plans to you. They're going to look at you and say, do we go or don't we, Mr. President? And you can't give a 90-second speech about your...
This is 1/3 reaction. Sometimes I don't know how much I'm supposed to react, because sometimes like I have reactions, but they're so like surface level that I don't know if I should share them. It's like sometimes I was like, man, that's fucking stupid. And it's like, well, it was kind of obvious it was stupid. So I'm not, okay, what, you want me to react harder? I'll try to react harder, chat.
Your military service, as vulnerable as it is.
Would you send American troops in to rescue those hostages?
Absolutely.
Oh, no, the TYT thing is 1/3 reaction. Oh, okay, got you. I'll still react harder. But yeah, you're right. They are kind of just reacting to the other debate.
If they had
Could you imagine the fifth Republican debate is just them reacting to Dean Phillips, Marianne, and Cenk Uygur on TYT? Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
Plan which showed me that we could get them out safely, you're damn right I'd send the American Army in there to get our people home and get them home now, and I'll answer that question directly.
So he was very direct. He would send U.S. forces in if it was requested, if there was a plan. Ron DeSantis went on to still not answer the question. And look, we're very used to politicians on debate stages not answering direct questions, but this seems...
By the way, let me put this out there. If it was a raid to get American citizens out and we had a high knowledge, like we had a high likelihood of success to get them out, I wouldn't be inherently against the proposal to do something like that, to get our people out of there. But that's a far cry from American forces dedicated in Gaza to be part of an occupation, to be part of an invasion, to take part in battle operations, in comparison to a quick, like 1 hour, like in, out, we got the hostages, let's go home. Anything like the former, I'm not completely opposed to. We can talk about. The latter, I think, is completely off the table. I don't even think it should be talked about. American forces in Gaza fighting.
Pretty consequential what you think the U.S.'s involvement in this continued conflict should be. So I want to turn to our participants now, starting with you, Marianne. What should U.S. involvement be in this conflict? What should the government be doing right now? What would you do, assuming the conflict is still raging, were you to become president?
God, hope not.
I don't have a problem with the United States supporting Israel. The issue is this bombing of Gaza. I don't even think is supporting Israel. I think the United States should have an equal commitment to the safety and the security and the human rights of both people. We all understand why Israel is furious. And we also might understand, Ron DeSantis has such an incredibly simplistic view of what's going on there. He says we need to help Israel win, have a victory so this could never happen again. What does he call a victory? Even if they are to get rid of all of the tunnels, which I certainly understand the urge to get rid of the tunnels, but their effort to do so is creating so much more hate. It is creating so much more Hamas. Hamas is not just an limited group of people. It's also a philosophy. So the United States should have for decades now been being far more truthful. I'm sorry, the settlements are illegal. The West Bank occupation is illegal. The siege of Gaza was wrong. No justice, no peace. There was never a military solution to the situation. The only solution is peace and justice for both people. I can see this only as a two-state solution at this point. And similarly, right now, there is no military solution. And the more time goes on, the more we still aren't hearing from Israel, what's the game plan here? So that the worst accusations against it are becoming harder and harder.
This position right here, what she's saying right here, hearing this on any Democratic debate stage, period, would feel pretty radical. But I do want to say that there's been a massive shift in the public perception of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, particularly within the Democratic base, with now the majority of the Democratic base feeling more sympathetic towards Palestine than Israel for the first time in history, according to recent polling. And so you can expect to see more commentary like this from Democratic-leaning politicians going into the future. Not saying a majority, but now that there's I don't want to say now that there's a market for it, people are going to serve that need, but in a way, yes. Now there's more room for that viewpoint.
Harder and harder to deflect or to disagree with. So the United States should be saying complete ceasefire, release of the hostages, and immediately an international consortium to work on plans for a two-state solution. And this has to involve, of course, Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Jordan, Egypt, as well as Western powers, as well as the United States. You know, we're living in a multipolar world now. There's no one country that goes in and can say what it's going to be anymore. But that's what the United States should stand for. Ceasefire, release of the hostages, two-state solution. And now the killing has got to stop.
Representative Phillips, what would your approach be? What should Biden be doing right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm the ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs. I've been to Jerusalem twice this year. I sat down with the prime minister, looked him in the eye, told him exactly what I thought. Had no idea, of course, that October 7th was forthcoming. Been to Riyadh and to Istanbul and Ankara to have conversations with both the Turks and the Saudis. We were so close to getting the Saudis to normalize with Israel. One reason I think the attack occurred on October 7th, by the way, is Iran. They don't want peace. Hamas doesn't want peace. And I hope Israelis soon choose to pursue a path of peace. You know, at the end of the day, it's not a simple solution, but it's a simple plan. Release the hostages. By the way, there are 8 Americans sitting in the tunnels right now, held hostages for now 2 months by a terrorist organization. And any of us who might become president should make that our number one priority. I do believe we made a big mistake with the $6 billion that was not the release of it, but the access to it in exchange for 5 prisoners from Iran. I think that sends a message to anybody else, including Hamas. You take American prisoners, you can extract billions of dollars. I think the president should be speaking about this every damn morning. I
do want to just make clear that the money in question wasn't like American money going to Iran. It was frozen Iranian assets that were released in exchange for prisoner release.
Every tool available to him, diplomatic tools, pressure with our foreign aid, and yes, special forces if they have a plan to extract Americans. It's the longest Americans have been held hostage in this number since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Release the hostages, an immediate ceasefire, replace Israeli troops in Gaza with an international, multinational peacekeeping force to keep the peace for Palestinians and Israelis, not to include Israel and the United States. But Hamas has got to be eliminated. That would also take a multinational task force. And then we have to all collectively make investments in civil society, democracy, infrastructure. And then 2 things have to happen. Palestinians must be afforded the chance to vote for the first time since 2006. The Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Mahmoud Abbas in his 80s, corrupt. Pay to slay is happening right now. They pay people who would be so bold as to kill an Israeli.
I'm waiting for him to say the creation of a Palestinian state. I'm waiting for him to say withdrawal of settlements. These are the things I'm waiting for. These are the major things I'm waiting for.
And Hamas is clearly dedicated to the destruction of Israel and the destruction of Jewish people. It's plain and simple. They've got to go too. And if Israelis and Palestinians finally choose peace, every single nation in the world, friends and foes,
I
Chinese
said nothing
and
about
US
Palestinian
and
nationhood. It was just, really? Is that it?
And everybody else, Gulf states have got to unify behind this. And I'm just going to turn the light back on President Biden. He's been in Washington for 50 years. He was the chairman and ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, 8 years as vice president, 3 years as president. It's the same cycle of nonsense my entire life. And to think the same people in the same positions doing it the same way are going to achieve success, Netanyahu's got to go. The settlement policy, I agree, is wrong.
Okay.
And Israelis, thank goodness, live in a democracy. 2 million Muslims living side by side with safety and security and protection. A multinational country protecting LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights. You know, there are.
Is there going to be a 2-state solution? Does he have a? Because if we just go in there, crush Hamas, do this multinational coalition thing he's proposing, very cosmopolitan, by the way, and he does, and we are able to achieve this. Do we create a Palestinian state at the end of this, or are we just going to hope that this new foundation, this new elected government in Gaza isn't going to end up like the old one, or isn't going to lead down another very negative path, even if there isn't a Palestinian state created? Because I feel like if you create the same exact conditions that created the current situation and change nothing except have another election, then you haven't set them up for success.
There are 140 Israelis that live in Gaza, but they're right now held hostage in a tunnel. So this has to end. And I just think it's time for the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli factions around the world to join hands, not take arms, join hands, because humanity is more important than nationality or religion, plain and simple.
Cenk, I want to end this segment by giving you a chance to respond to this topic.
Yeah. So there are actually some things that I disagree with Dean on, but I do want to agree with him that, yes, Biden has been in Washington for 50, maybe even 60 years at this point. And when they do that thing about, oh, he's Joe from Scranton. Oh, come on, guys. Come on. He hasn't been to Scranton in 5, 6 decades in terms of living there. Okay, but let's address the issue here. So, look, I agree with Chris Christie that Ron DeSantis never answers the question, and I think that was one of his better moments. But I wildly disagree with Chris Christie when he says we should send in American troops. Okay, first of all, that's nuts. We're not going to go and get into a bigger war in the Middle East. Number two, what are they needed for? It's not like the Palestinians have an ability to fight back against Israel's military. Israel's military is 2,000 times stronger. It's not really a war. It's just utter destruction of Gaza. So what happened on October 7th was horrific. And Israel had the moral high ground there, and I wish that they had gone to a productive solution, which I'm going to offer here at the end. But look, all the Republicans there, I think, for lack of a better word, are mental. I mean, Ron DeSantis talking about how Joe Biden has kneecapped and hobbled Israel's response. How many more civilians did you want him to kill? So there's 15,000 dead in Gaza, and that's...
There's a good reminder that, look, I believe that the Biden administration needs to do an immediate review of Israel's compliance with international law and see if there have been instances of war crimes or for example, not respecting proportionality when conducting strikes. When you do 6,000 strikes in 6 days, exceed the entire month of the height of Operation Inherent Resolve bombing, I do think that should be looked into. And according to Josh Paul, a State Department official that went over weapons procurement for our allies, it was his job to review it. He resigned over the issue of them not being able to discuss this very issue and over them not going through that process of review out of a fear that they might find something. And then under not only international law, but both international and U.S. law, like according to the Leahy laws, for example, they might have to stop sending over American weapons, which would then strain the American-Israeli alliance.
And Joe Biden pretty much gave a complete green light to that, certainly for the great majority of the time.
Like those, wait, sorry, I forgot my point. But those are things that I can be more aggressive about against the Biden administration. There are things I can critique them on. But just a reminder that if Joe Biden wasn't in there, all the aid that would have gotten in from Egypt, who knows if any of it would have gotten in? Who knows if there would have been any pauses in fighting, any ceasefires? Who knows if Israel would have gone much harder? In fact, I would believe, if we're talking about Donald Trump, who said target the families of terrorists explicitly on the campaign trail, and said in response to this whole situation, for a pint of your blood, we'll take like 5 gallons of theirs. Yeah, I do think it would be much worse.
Is 15,000 dead civilians not enough for Ron DeSantis? And so how much more of a green light could Joe Biden have given Israel? It's preposterous. So, look, the idea that you're going to get a total and complete military victory that DeSantis talked about against Hamas is absurd. When is Hamas going to get up and go, okay, we lost? How? How would we even know? How would we know if the Palestinians have turned on Hamas? How would we know if Hamas is lost? We haven't seen Hamas basically since October. So yes, they fire rockets, etc. But they're in the tunnels, and the tunnels appear to be completely unaffected by the bombing, yet Israel continues to drop 2,000-pound bombs. And now Israel has admitted, yes, there are 15,000 dead in Gaza. And so, look, my solution is harsher in regards to restricting our ally. If you're going to use our money to kill those civilians, I say no. I would not send $14 billion to Israel for more death and destruction. And I honestly would not send them any more money, period, until they end the occupation. It has to be 2 states. It's non-negotiable. I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to kill Palestinian civilians and to keep them occupied in an open-air prison for decades. So
I hope I see that same level of commitment to other forms of occupation from Cenk.
No deal. Now, if they end the occupation, then fantastic. We love Israel and we want Israel.
Because in the Ukraine instance, like they're fighting against we're on the side that's fighting against the occupation, and he wants to stop the military shipments.
Israel to be a flourishing, beautiful country that is a strong democratic ally of America. So finally, the productive solution is, look, if Israel were to now say, you know what, we're going to do a deal with the Palestinian Authority and they are going to run Gaza. But in order for them to have the moral authority to do that, because at this point, even Palestinians in the West Bank are beginning to see the Palestinian Authority as collaborators with Israel because they're helping to continue to occupy the West Bank, say we are reaching a peace deal, 1967 borders, and we're doing it not with Hamas, never with Hamas, but with the Palestinian Authority. So Palestinian Authority then can come and take Gaza and control Gaza and drive Hamas out. That actually would be total and complete victory against Hamas, because then the Palestinian Authority would say, we brought you a Palestinian state. And they would have the credibility to be able to do that. And if you want to say, hey, maybe not 1967 borders, take 4% for settlers, etc., okay, we can have that conversation. But get to a peace deal immediately, get to a 2-state solution immediately, and regain the moral high ground for Israel and for America.
We are going to have to take our first
guys, if I could just say one thing quick. I'm not here to defend Chris Christie, but just facts are facts. The question was whether you would use troops to extract the hostages. That was my comment. That was Christie's comment. I don't think anyone was proposing sending American boots to the ground, but I do think it's an American president's priority and prerogative. If American hostages are being held and there is a plan to extract them, to then use American troops, not in a ground war in Israel or Gaza, but to extract Americans. That should be our highest priority. By the way, why is it not on every single newspaper cover every day? Why is the president not speaking about it every single day? And I got to tell you all, the truth is, I think it's because they're Israeli Americans. And that's the truth.
But nobody knows where they are. And everybody knows that they don't know where they are. The Israelis don't know where they are.
My point wasn't that. My point is, we have 8 American hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas. And I think this should be a bigger deal to the United States of America. That's all I'm saying. They're Americans.
Okay. Yeah, I got to agree with Dean on that. I think that Israel should have used special forces from the first day to try.
I don't know, like, what more Joe Biden could do on the special forces side. I don't, like, if he doesn't have the location of these people, I don't know what then he can't do a special forces raid. Then he has to hope for and push for negotiations. If you can't get them out through other means, then that's the only way they can get them back. I don't know what more you could really ask of Joe Biden. I guess he says, like, talk about it more. I guess he could do that. Yeah, I guess.
Try to rescue the hostages from inside the tunnels.
I don't know. I feel like it's a very thin criticism.
Dropping bombs on civilians and residential buildings, hospitals, etc., doesn't help rescue the hostages at all. We got to get our people back. With that. We got to get our people back, and we've got to show the courage to be able to go into those tunnels and extract them.
Okay, on that note, we do have to take our first break, everyone. We're going to mix it up more on the other side of this. I just want to remind everyone watching live that you do have an opportunity at a discount on annual membership to TYT. You can get that at TYT.
Debate.
Debate Response Forum. Figure out the acronym on that. We've got a lot more to dive into.
I didn't know it was a debate response forum. I thought it was oh, it does say debate response. I thought it was its own debate. Oh, it's a sub-debate.
And I actually want to start off with Representative Dean Phillips here. You had mentioned in one of your earlier responses that there wasn't much of a conversation about affordability. And it did come up very briefly in a question that Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis responded to, talking about how it seems increasingly impossible for especially young Americans to conceive of owning their own home. And what they were promised by those candidates, Nikki Haley promised to veto government spending bills and grow the economy. Okay. And Ron DeSantis said the same and added that he would drill for more oil. So I feel reassured. Is there anything else, hard as it is to imagine, that could be done to make home ownership more conceivable?
Mr. Ron DeSantis, I'm homeless. What will you do for me? I will suck the black souls of dinosaurs out of the earth to heat up my home. It's like, oh, okay. Thank you. Now I'm housed.
Absolutely. I have to tell you all, I'm sure you feel the same way. I mean, considering these are the top 4 alternatives to the most dangerous man in the history of the United States. And I'm just astounded by their lack of ideation, innovation. It's all nonsense. And the truth of the matter, this is so simple. We live in a very simple economy, supply and demand. We are 6.5 million housing units short, which means prices will always be high no matter interest rates. No matter who becomes president, we need to initiate a 7 million unit massive nationwide housing construction initiative. Multifamily, high density units all around the country. We know how to do it. We have to change some zoning laws. We have to reduce some of the red tape. We have to ensure there's capital provision. But until we build more housing units, prices won't go down and availability won't go up. We have 500,000 Americans sleeping in the streets, not just San Francisco and LA and Chicago and New York. I'm here in New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire, across the street. There are veterans sleeping in Veterans Park, for goodness sake. So
look, I don't like the design of commie blocks after having been in Ukraine for so long, but it is nice having cheap housing.
This is not rocket science. And when you work and live in a market economy, it's really simple. If you create the circumstances by which private developers, in this case, want to build because they can make a profit, it's so simple. And I cannot believe that not one of the GOP candidates on that stage tonight said the most simple thing. We should have a national housing initiative, period, end homelessness, ensure that everybody has a home. And yes, interest rates are way too high, and we should make sure that first-time home buyers and first-generation home buyers have a chance. I'd also like to see a national
Hey, Mark Von Wisco, thanks for the primer. I appreciate it.
Service program where after high school, if you take a year and join AmeriCorps or Peace Corps, we will seed you with some capital to buy a home, because that's how we create wealth in America.
Ah, shit, I'd pick that up, man. I'd do a year or two in USAID for some capital for a home.
I think those are some ideas we should consider, and I'd love to hear from my friends.
Cenk, let's go to you next. What do you think can be done?
Yeah, so first of all, with the Republicans, it is stunning how little they talk about the average American. Almost not at all. They talk about who they're going to invade. They're going to go after China. They're going to spend special forces into Mexico, different weirdo wars they're going to start, and corporations that they're going to kiss up to, et cetera, and never talk about the average American. So first off, if I was Joe Biden, let alone any of the other presidents, I would have done $15 minimum wage instantly, immediately. That was their first promise.
Oh, okay. Well, why didn't Joe Biden just do that? He should have just got on the big presidential throne and decreed to all the little princes in the land that the minimum wage was just $15 now, and just that be done with it. Joe Biden did try to push $15 minimum wage. He tried to push it through budget reconciliation, because usually you would need 60 votes in the Senate in order to pass it due to the filibuster. But it didn't have 60 votes in the Senate. And so what he did instead to try to get $15 minimum wage across, which was what he promised on the campaign trail, was through budget reconciliation. But then, since it was split by 50-50 votes and the tiebreaker was Kamala Harris, and then I forget, not the rules maker, the Senate parliamentarian said that it was not constitutional, then President Joe Biden backed down off the $15 minimum wage, because he would have to challenge the Senate parliamentarian and get through a 50-50 vote with Senator Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema as the tie-breaking votes, meaning you would have to convince them both to reject the Senate parliamentarian somehow. Now, Kyrsten Sinema, maybe early Biden presidency when she was still a Democrat. Joe Manchin, that's a fucking tough sell, man. And so if he could figure out how to maneuver that politically, good luck to Mr. Cenk. The only thing I would propose, because I think a lot of times people talk about punitive solutions to Joe Manchin, when Joe Manchin is the only Democrat that can hold that seat and will soon not hold that seat anyway. So there's like, what leverage? Oh, you're going to run a primary against him? Yeah. What, Paula Jean Swearengin? Yeah, good luck. When, I don't know, like, you could offer something maybe more rewarding, more carrot over stick. You know, maybe some like bridge or infrastructure investment, stuff like that. I don't know. It's a difficult political situation to maneuver. So when Cenk Uygur just says do it instantly, I don't know how he does it instantly.
The bare minimum promise, and they didn't do it. Why? Guys, when you increase the minimum wage, it increases the wages for everyone. That's when everybody flips out in the establishment and goes, oh my God, inflation. No, you need higher wages to keep up with the inflation that already happened. So we've got to stick up for the average guy instead of all the multinational corporations.
Yeah, I ended up doing $15 for federal employees. That's what he had the power to do as the chief executive, but he hasn't been able to get it passed for everybody.
Or drug prices. Why can't we negotiate drug prices? That's not capitalism. That's the exact opposite of capitalism. They've totally captured our government. And every politician, Democratic or Republican, that becomes president says, oh, it's too hard to do in Washington. But they never explain why. Why?
Well, I just explained why. I mean, he could explain why not and why it's easy.
Why is it too hard to do the bare minimum in a capitalist free market system of negotiating drug prices?
Well, we should. These are all things we should be able to do, by the way. And we've been able to negotiate a small list of, I think, like 20 or 30 drugs on Medicare now due to a Biden proposal that he was able to get through. But there's a difference between what should be the case and what is the case. And $15 minimum wage was politically difficult. Not as in the eyes of the public, but with who is in power, the votes.
It's because the drug companies have bought all the politicians. They gave them literally billions of dollars in legalized bribes. That is why if Barack Obama or Donald Trump go to try to negotiate drug prices, which they didn't, but if they did, they would be met with a wall of Republicans and Democrats who would say, no way. I take money from drug companies. I serve drug companies. We will keep those drug prices sky high. And then Joe Biden brags that he negotiated drug prices on one drug out of tens of thousands. Congrats. Wow, at least you got up to do that. So
thought it was
now,
like 20 or 30.
When it comes to the housing prices, Biden back in 2020 said, oh, these young kids, they think they have it tough. That's malarkey. We had it much tougher. No, you didn't. That's not even remotely true, according to the facts. Student debt is now much higher than it was in Biden's time. Its housing prices are infinitely higher than the 1800s when Biden was first thinking of buying it. I don't know what Biden's first house was. Was it worth $5, $25? It's a literal question. I know that it's not literally $25, but he probably bought a house for around $20,000, $25,000. That doesn't happen anymore. In the big cities, nobody can afford houses. Now it's coming straight out of Compton means you're a millionaire because that's what the houses in Compton are going for in LA. Okay, so how do you get a hold of it? You do real things that can help. First of all, private equity is swallowing up all the residential real estate in this country. Do you understand what happens if they do that? Number one, the number one way that American families build wealth is through their houses.
Dude, I'm gonna buy a house deep in the West Virginia countryside. I'm gonna buy and restore a house deep in the West Virginia countryside. One day I'm going to disappear and seclude myself to that cheap farmland. It's going to be great. That's my housing policy, personally.
If the private equity guys, Wall Street,
one day it's going to come up on the news. It's going to be referred to as the compound, and we'll explore possibilities from there.
Up all the houses, then we can no longer build any wealth. And then they've got us. We're indentured servants forever. Because we have no wealth to fight back with, we have no house of our own, and then we have to pay them rent. So they just extract and extract and extract. So in cities like LA, New York, et cetera, they constantly talk about building more houses, fighting homelessness, as Dean referred to, and then they take a giant amount of money from us, and they never fix the problem. Why? They actually do dedicate a lot of money to real estate, but real estate is usually the number one donors in state politics. So what they do is they take the money and build luxury high-rises because those pay more. I get it. They get a bigger profit. But don't do it with our money. If we're financing building houses, it should be affordable housing, and it should be for the average American. So we're getting robbed left and right from both the companies and the politicians.
You mentioned there Wall Street. Actually, just earlier today, Jeff Merkley and Adam Smith introduced a bill that would ban Wall Street, like gobbling up of real estate. Marianne, I want to go to you next. Should we be focusing mainly on big corporations' effect on the supply and hoarding housing, or is there something else that you think could have a bigger impact on housing affordability?
Yeah, there's something else. Obviously, private equity is a big part of this, but still, that's just talking about the symptom, and we need to talk about the root cause. The root cause of all of this is the fact that the American economy is so rigged. You know, in the 1970s, the average American worker had decent benefits, could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a vacation, could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted, the couple could, and they could afford to send their kids to college. Over the last few decades, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. So the housing crisis is like everything else. It is a malevolent strain of vulture capitalism that has its tentacles into every sector of American society. We need to cut the cord with that aberrational neoliberal trickle-down chapter of American history and begin again. We need an economic bill of rights. Remember, one of the reasons people can't afford a house is they can't afford anything. You know, there's a saying that Americans can't afford America. So why can't they afford a house? It's not just the prices of houses. It's everything else they have to pay for. That's why in an economic bill of rights, we have universal health care. It's not just negotiating with the pharmaceuticals. We should go on and have Medicare for all, universal health care. We should get rid of these college loan debts. We should have tuition-free college and tech school. We should have subsidized child care. We should have guaranteed sick pay. We should have guaranteed housing, which might include a domestic Marshall Plan and a guaranteed living wage. This is not just about a higher minimum wage. We need a living wage. As long as we have an economy, and we are not addressing the fundamental fact that we are a government of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations, not just in housing, but in everything, and return to the fundamental commitment to a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then even if you make it right on the symptom of housing, you're still going to have too much, in fact, what is now ubiquitous human suffering in this country. Public policy should help people thrive. And in too many cases, in fact, in issue after issue after issue, our elected representatives pass laws that make it easier for those who already have capital to have access to more, and make it harder for everyone else who is even struggling to get by. So it's really important that we see that about housing and about everything else. These are symptoms, and we need to address the underlying problem.
Okay, they're letting them talk for too long. They're getting out too much shit. I wish we got to concentrate on like a few policy. Like, there's a lot of good policy, like she's throwing out, not good policy specifically, but like good or at least positive-ish ideas that she's throwing out that I largely agree with. But I'm finding two issues. One, there's just so much getting thrown out in such a short period of time. I wish that these segments were shorter so it was easier to digest, and as they were reading the next question I could like digest what was being said. And two, because of that, there's like not really a lot of time for specifics, and that's also making me just like, it's like vaguely positive. That's why I'm saying it's vaguely positive.
And that's what the Democratic Party should stand for. That should be our counter narrative to the Republicans in 2024, that they are a group of...
I wish it was more back and forth, but there's only like 3 people. So I guess they're just letting them all just speak uninterrupted.
People at this point, and a set of policies that stand only for the very, very rich and for the corporate entities that they represent. The Democratic Party is sort of split right now, and the left needs a spine. And we need to truly...
Okay, we get it. Fucking Jesus Christ.
Stand up for a complete fundamental economic reform, a fundamental economic U-turn.
She loves the word fundamental. She really does.
And a new beginning, economically and in every other way, concerning justice, criminal justice, racial justice, economic justice in this country.
All of you in different areas, talked about how this is sort of an interconnected issue with a number of other concerns. And I want to stay on affordability, but I want to talk about the affordability of a few other things that came up during this debate. Actually, Ron DeSantis was asked about the affordability of education, and he was also asked about health insurance in response to basically it was framed around Donald Trump once again saying that he wants to repeal and replace the ACA. Ron DeSantis says that he would supersede it. I think because repeal and replace doesn't poll well. It seems like the same thing. But he said we shouldn't be canceling student debt, because no one should be, a truck driver should not be paying for some college graduate's gender studies degree. So to avoid that, you could be burdened for your entire life with student debt. And he didn't have any answers other than more.
Dude, if I could get $20,000 from working class people from Idaho to pay for me to study cock at UMD, sounds like a good deal. I don't know why people are against that country.
Competition for health insurance. So, Cenk, I want to go to you next. These are big areas where people are worried about affordability that drains money for people, young people, especially throughout their life. What can be done in these areas?
So on healthcare, number one, lowering drug prices is so incredibly simple. It's literally what every other country does. It's what every free market does. Hey, a company says, I would like you to pay this. Well, that's not how it works. We're gonna have the market set the prices based on competition. But in this country, because we legalized bribery, they just come in and go, no, this is the price you'll pay, and we'll charge as much as we like. And every Democratic president and every Republican president says, yes, sir, absolutely, sir. Where's the money? Where do I clear my check? Let's be honest. Let's be honest about what's happening. So we could, any one of us could lower drug prices instantly because we're not taking money from drug companies. Problem solved. So that's point one. All right, point two is, look, we need to have universal health care in this country. Medicare for all is a perfectly great way to do it. Every other developed nation has universal health care, the equivalent of Medicare for all, and none of them have sunk into the water.
I gotta say, on one hand, I think it's good that conversations like this are being had. Definitely when we haven't had a big conversation around healthcare in this country in a while, even though it's still a priority amongst American voters. If you poll them, they still care deeply about healthcare, even though it's getting very little screen time. A lot of screen time for, book bans, a lot of screen time for, gender studies and complaining about the woke culture war, a lot of screen time for a lot of issues, not a lot of screen time for healthcare. And so it's good to have this type of discussion online amongst influencers and amongst at least one actually elected congressperson. But I do also want to throw out there, Cenk Uygur has zero political experience. I have zero idea how he would ever try to get something like Medicare for all across this incredibly divided Congress. There would need to be a blue wave unheard of before for us to be able to pull off something like that, especially if you don't have a lot of political experiences or ties on the Hill or knowledge of how the levers of the system works. I'm just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there. This is something that was very difficult for me to learn early on in politics, which is just because somebody has all the best policy or agrees with you on all the best policy doesn't mean they have any idea of how to get those policies in action. Somebody being there's a difference between a policy wonk and a legislator.
Right? I mean, the guys like Louis Gohmert, who's a Republican congressman, made insane claims about Obamacare and said that 20% of the women in this country would die if we had Obamacare. Bunch of lunatics. Did 20% of the women in the country die? No, they got better health care. So now Obamacare was a very mild approach. It's one tiny step towards universal health care. We need to get all the way to universal health care. If Estonia can afford it and every other developed nation on earth can afford it, how could we not be able to afford it? No, of course we can afford it. The only reason we don't have it has nothing to do with healthcare. It has to do with the legalized bribes that almost all of these politicians take from those same drug companies and the health insurance companies. But now let me tell you about the bare minimum. Public option polls at around 70%. 7 out of 10 Americans, including Republicans and definitely independents, they all say, well, at a minimum, I'd like an option of buying from the government my health insurance, just my health insurance, right? Because maybe it's a lower price. I like that idea. Again, something that almost every other developed nation does. Joe Biden said, oh, I'm in favor of public option. You know when he proposed it? Oh, right. Never. So You tell me why he didn't propose it. Was he lying? I think he was. Maybe you have a more benign view of Joe Biden. I
think he should have proposed it. I do think that's true. But I also don't think he'd ever had a chance of passing this Congress, this legislature. I just don't think so. I would like to hear an alternative view, but I think the odds of getting a public option through this legislature was slim to nil, especially the last 2 years after the midterms when the Republicans took the House. But I mean, even beforehand. I mean, you would have to get rid of the filibuster at a minimum. And getting rid of the filibuster in and of itself is its own conundrum, considering that Joe Manchin didn't want to participate in any legislation that got rid of the filibuster.
No, Cenk, don't be harsh and don't be unfair. Maybe he's just incompetent and doesn't know how to introduce a bill, doesn't know how to get an ally to introduce it. No,
it'd be good to introduce it and to stump on it. I agree with that. He should have stumped on it more because it's popular. It's very popular. And I want Biden saying popular things, because if Biden says popular things and says, if you help me become more popular and you give me more seats, I can introduce these popular things, then maybe he'll actually win more seats for his party. But that critique separate than why hasn't he implemented Medicare for all, which he doesn't have the seats for. And not Medicare for all, but public option, which he doesn't have the seats for.
Doesn't know how to do a standalone bill and embarrass the Republicans by having them vote against their own voters. Not only couldn't he not get something intensely popular done, he didn't even try. Wouldn't it be amazing to have a Democratic president that you didn't have to beg to do a Democratic agenda? Every time a Democratic president wins, now all of us have to get together and push them to do the right thing. Why? We already elected them. We did our part. Why do we have to constantly push them to do the thing that they promised? You won't have to push me. No, I'll be the one doing the pushing. And so, yes, if you elect me, I'm going to fight like hell for the average American, and I don't give a damn what the insurance companies say or the drug companies say.
I will say this. I do think Cenk would be our loudest president ever.
Or what other corrupt politicians say. We're actually going to get affordable health care in this country. It is very doable the minute you fight corruption.
Marianne, I want to go to you next. What do you think?
Yeah, let's be very clear. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. Not only that, people are waking up to the fact that it is afforded to the citizens of every other advanced democracy, and even some advanced democracies that are not democracies. So when people ask, how are we paying for it? Right now, we're paying for not having it with our lives. 68,000 Americans a year die of lack of health care. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. That's a large part when you're talking about housing crisis or anything else, medical debt. So at this point, when you have 18 million Americans who can't even afford to pay for the prescriptions that their doctors give them, when you have 85 million Americans uninsured or underinsured, we have to realize that the insurance companies, yes, it's not only the private equity, which is why people can't have houses, it's insurance companies, which is why people don't have health care, pharmaceutical companies, which is why over 1 million Americans are rationing their insulin. It's big food companies, which is why we have carcinogens in our food that are forbidden in other advanced democracies. It's chemical companies, which is why we have chemicals and pesticides that we know harm a child's brain. It's big agriculture and what it has done to our farming sector.
She's too much. She's fucking piling up too much. Fucking the chemicals in the children's brain. Like, stay on the healthcare section. Stay on the healthcare.
It's big oil, which is why
you were good. Now we're on big oil. Fucking no, stay.
I don't care if they have a Democrat or Republican, including Joe Biden. They are ramping up fossil fuel extraction.
And I feel really sympathetic for this. And the reason I feel super sympathetic for this is because I do the same thing all the time, and so I sympathize deeper.
Not ramping it down, even though we know what a threat that is to the future habitability of this planet. And of course, it goes without saying that Democrats and Republicans fall in line with the military-industrial complex. We have to get to this root cause, and that is this matrix of corporate overlords and their short-term profit maximizations. The way Washington works right now, the short-term profits of these huge corporate entities, which are their donors, take precedence over the safety and the health and the well-being of the American people. People don't have health care. People can't afford to send their kids to college. They're saddled by college loan debts. They can't they can't buy a house, because the system itself is such right now that these corporatist principles of corporate profits take precedence over democratic values. They take precedence over humanitarian values. That's what people have to realize. And that there's only one way to override this. There's only one way to cut the cord with that system of economic tyranny. And that is with a revolution at the ballot box. And Cenk was right at the beginning. We have to go about the business of letting the American people know. That's why.
Look, isn't this a debate? Where's the debate? I think they disagreed on Israel for like half of a second.
You should vote for one of us. You should vote for the Democrats. But I got to tell you something. I don't think Joe Biden can make the argument that I just made because it's these incremental approaches.
It just feels like each one of them are just making stump speeches one after the other, which isn't terrible. There should be some of that in these debates, but there should also be more like, hey, we disagree on this. Let's see where these politicians' values meet and end with each other.
All staying within the context of, in the final analysis, we're not going to do anything that upsets that much our corporate donors. This is how fundamental the problem is and why the American people need to rise up. Only an intervention on the part of the people can change this now.
Representative Phillips?
I think we're all in agreement. We need national health insurance. Strangely enough, I think Richard Nixon may have been one of the more liberal presidents in my lifetime who started the EPA and proposed universal health coverage. And who undermined it in the Senate? Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy, go figure. Anyway, we're all in agreement. I represent United Health Group in my district. I chaired the board of the largest health system in Minnesota, LINA. I spent a lot of time on this subject. There's no question we need a national health insurance program quickly. 66% of all bankruptcies in the United States of America are due to medical debt. We spend $12,000 per capita, which is double that of any developed nation in the world. And our outcomes are mid-pack. And as Cenk was saying about pharmaceutical pricing, Marianne, you agreed? Yeah, they spend $300 million a year enriching the campaign coffers of my colleagues in Congress. Of course, they want to maintain the status quo. And it's so easy. There should not be a single pharmaceutical sold in the United States of America for 1 penny higher than is sold in Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, Spain, or Japan. Simple.
Well, that's like 5 or 6 separate countries with different prices. So that, okay.
But the biggest issue I have to tell you guys is
But I mean, I agree on principle.
System. We don't have health care. We have sick care. And that means we pay for sickness. We pay for procedures. We've got to start.
Oh, you heard Marianne perk up at that, of course. Yeah, she'd love something like that. She's snapping in the background.
Investing in health. And my goodness, we live in a society as human beings in which incentives matter. So we should be providing incentives to the healthcare providers to keep people sick out of the hospital, to keep them from being sick. And it's not rocket science, but to your point, we have massively successful industries, both the pharmaceutical industry and the health insurance industry. And let me tell you, I spent a lot of time with my Republican constituents in Minnesota. They are just as disgusted with health insurers and the pharma business as anybody. There is a way to get this done. If Richard Nixon could have proposed it and a Democrat undermined him, I think we should be working together right now and get it done. And by the way, there is more than enough money in that system where we could actually reduce the comprehensive cost of care and have it consume less than the 18% of our total economy than it does right now. It's an absolute.
Thank you all for continuing to watch. We are going to have to take our second break, but I want you to stick around because on the other side of this, we're going to be talking about what might have been the largest single issue focus in the Republican debate, what weirdly wasn't brought up during the debate, and also talking about Donald Trump's attempt to counter-program the debate. All that and more after this.
Okay, so I doubt, are they going to talk about Ukraine at all? Of course, I'm a Ukraine hog. Okay. Back to the debates. Here we are.
I'm a TYT annual member. You can head to tyt.com/annual to receive a special 24% discount that is available right now. Representative Phillips, I want to talk about what seemed to me like the topic that came up the most, both right off the bat and then later on. And I'm going to start with a question, a video of Chris Christie being asked about the fact that he alone among the Republicans on the stage does not support banning hormonal therapy for transgender youths. Let's take a look at that video.
Is this really it?
As a father of 4, I believe there is no one who loves my children more than me. There's no one who loves my children more than my wife. There's no one who cares more about their success and health in life than we do. Not some government bureaucrat, not some. You look at these jokers down in Congress. It takes them 3 weeks to pick a speaker, and up until 2 days ago, they couldn't promote somebody in the military in the United States Senate who earned their new rank. And we're going to put my children's health and my decisions in their hands.
By the way, the reason why they wouldn't promote, and it was Tommy Tuberville, it was the football senator who just recently got elected. He had blocked military promotions because the military had started to provide a service to people in states which had now banned abortion that would bus them to a state which did allow abortion if they wanted to get an abortion. And the Biden administration made the argument that now that Roe versus Wade was overturned, as an employer, they had to give everybody the same health benefits or it would be discriminatory. Therefore, they had to provide the service.
Vishy for president.
Hey, thanks for the $5. Vishy for president. You got my endorsement since you paid me. That's how I work here. Mercenary, completely for sale. And so Tommy Tuberville responded by saying, how dare he do that? How dare we have this policy? I don't want tax dollars paying for abortion bus rides. And he then said, I will not allow any military promotions until this policy is reversed. And the Biden administration said, no, if you want to reverse the policy, win an election. And so he continued to block the promotions for months and months and months and months, promotions that were almost always bipartisan, to the point that it was having an effect on our military's readiness. And this got more and more complaints to the point where he eventually had to back down. And he backed down before, like a month ago, but now he did the majority of the backing down, allowing 440 people to be voted on this time. Now there's only a few key military seats that he's still holding out on a desperate attempt to still try to reverse the policy. Anyway, there's the context.
Some government bureaucrat, not some. You look at these jokers down in Congress. It takes them 3 weeks to pick a speaker, and up until 2 days ago, they couldn't promote somebody in the military in the United States Senate who earned their new rank. And we're going to put my children's health and my decisions in their hands for them to make those decisions, for Joe Biden to make those decisions, for me and for my wife. Let me just say this. This is not something I favor. I think it's a very, very dangerous thing to do. But that's my opinion as a parent, Megyn. And I get to make the decisions about my children, not anybody else. And every parent out there who's watching tonight, you start to turn over just a little bit of this authority, the authority they're going to take from you next, you're not going to like. I'll stand up for parents each and every time.
Chris Christie was alone on that particular issue, and he tried to couch it as a parents' rights issue.
I think that is, look, okay, I understand that many in my audience, me included, would rather see a more like humanizing type of argument directed towards the trans community and trans people, but I think policy-wise, and to that crowd, that is the best pitch possible on these policies to try to get people to reconsider them trying to block these gender-affirming services for trans youth.
But it did come up very often, the larger issue around the LGBTQ community, with both Ron DeSantis and Haley unprompted mentioning the topic in their first questions they were asked, which were not about that topic, and then both of them in their first response to each other talking about it. Vivek Ramaswamy, amongst a long line of the conspiracy theories that he supports, he was machine gunning through them, talked about how he thinks that being transgender is a mental health disorder, and Nikki Haley called trans athlete participation in sports the women's issue of our time. So clearly this is something that they are very hyper-focused on. I want to give you an opportunity, Representative Phillips, to respond to this topic.
Well, first, one of the first statements I heard from Nikki Haley is accusing Ron DeSantis of his...
I gotta say, right after Roe versus Wade being overturned, saying that trans women's participation in sports is the women's issue of her time. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. There's so little self-awareness. Self-awareness on lower levels than ever thought possible.
First statements I heard from Nikki Haley is accusing Ron DeSantis of his Don't Say Gay bill of not going far enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's Nikki Haley saying this. You guys, I got to tell you, I just don't get it. I wish I did. I don't understand the lack of compassion, the lack of love, the lack of understanding, the lack of basic human decency, and the fact you have candidates on the GOP right now who are fighting harder and harder to be more mean-spirited than the other. I just don't get it. It's appalling. I'm the father of a daughter who's gay. She's extraordinary. I don't know why in the United States of America we have not moved beyond this. And I'm glad as Democrats that we lead with love and compassion. I want to salute one Republican, I think Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah, as it relates to trans rights, as to trans young kids playing in sports and whatnot. I think he's doing it better than most, and I think we should pay attention to those who are actually leading with some principle. But what a sad.
And I guys just put out there, if Republicans decide to keep running with this in the general, the trans women in sport, if they make this a major theme of their campaign, this is the type of stuff that will lead to them losing in 2024. Not because Americans are so like rah pro-trans, even though some people will be turned off, I think, by transphobia. It'll be because they're like, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck about your dumb fucking bathroom bill. I care about how the child tax credit was taken off the table and the reduction in our living standard due to us not being able to use that money for groceries, being able to use that money for childcare, being able to use that money to have a babysitter, watch after the kids as we go out to movie night. I think those are the type of issues that are going to hit harder with voters. I think that our foreign policy issues actually this year, considering how much is going on, I think stuff like that and concern about national security and how safe people feel with how unstable the world looks, I think that's going to hit a lot harder with voters than whether or not Timothy, the nervous trans woman, with the, Fallout New Vegas' #1 fan, who doesn't like to talk to anyone anyway because they're a fucking massive introvert, is somehow going to like pin you down in the bathroom. No, they're going to go in there, you do the business and leave, just like everybody else. It's just not an important issue to the majority of voters. This is only important to the Matt Walsh caucus, okay? Just a part of the party that's going to vote for Republicans no matter what anyway. So if they're going to engage in this type of rhetoric, now's the time for them to prove their transphobic loyalty, and then later in a year is for when they're going to forget about it, like they've even fucking talked about it, because they know that's not what's going to win suburban wine moms, that's not what's going to win over centrists, that's not what's going to win over swing voters, that's not what's going to win over Pennsylvanians, Michigans, etc.
State of affairs tonight. I can't imagine being a trans person, a gay person, a queer person watching that GOP debate tonight. I cannot imagine what that must feel like in the 21st century in the United States of America to see the Republican Party fight to the bottom of such basic human decency issues. And I got to tell you another thing, when it comes to rights, by the way, I'm going to point out the truth when I see it. Remember when President Obama and Vice President Biden had the White House and the House and the Senate for 4 months when they were elected, and we didn't codify women's reproductive rights into law? These are the mistakes that Democrats have been making for far too damn long, far too long. And look at the consequences. This is a party, by the way, the GOP, that
there wasn't much time during that early Obama presidency to codify. For those of you who don't know, if we were to, for example, pass reproductive health care rights into law with a majority in the House and Senate, we could codify it. Then when Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, then it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, it still would have mattered, but people would have still had those protections codified. In the early Obama presidency, there was a period where we had enough votes barely to do it, but also that person who we needed for the vote, one of the votes we needed, the person was sick and kind of off, and so it'd be difficult. But there was a short period where it was semi-possible, and since we had Roe versus Wade as the law of the land, it was not considered a priority for the Democratic administration. Definitely considering everything that was going on with the housing crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, trying to salvage the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was not considered a priority. And so now what Dean Phillips's point is, we should have emphasized that as a priority at the time. We should have tried to get it passed at the time.
says they're for freedom and liberty. And my goodness, every chance they get, they want to take it away from people. And why they think government should be involved in a woman's body, why they think a man, for goodness sake, should even have anything to do with it. Wow. That's why I know we will all agree on this Zoom tonight. Why we are not absolutely destroying Donald Trump in a national election is just astounding. Astounding after the display I saw on that stage tonight. Anyway, that's why I'm proud to be a Democrat, but boy, do we have to take up our game. And most of all, we got to win.
And to bear in mind also that Donald Trump has now announced that he is going to be trying to run as a moderate on the topic of abortion, which you referenced there. We'll see about that. But Cenk, I do want to give you an opportunity to respond to the topic.
Yeah. First of all, Donald Trump's a guy who cost us Roe v. Wade. So the idea that he'd be a moderate on abortion is absurd. And he's only doing that because he's a slimy con man. After he destroys women's rights to choose, now he's going to pretend that he's a moderate on the issue. But the problem with Democrats a lot of times, like Joe Biden, is that they never fight back. So Joe Biden should be out there pummeling Donald Trump on costing women the right to choose. But I haven't heard one word. I haven't heard one word in that regard. Oh, he starts every speech with...
I've heard stuff like that. He doesn't make enough public statements and he isn't aggressive enough. It's not his style and it's not the uniting vibe that he's trying to put out there. But I mean, he should be doing it more. Absolutely. But he does do that. I've heard him do it. I've heard his spokespeople do it.
With my Republican friends.
So, they know it's going to be a massive motivator for the Democratic base to get out there and mobilize. Is going to be the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the fear of having more Republican conservative Supreme Court members and making the situation worse.
Sorry, but I don't have Republican friends. So it's not to say that we're not going to deliver for Republican voters. We are. When we raise wages, their wages are going to go up. When we lower truck prices, their truck prices are going to go down. But when you talk about Republican politicians, sorry, I'm not with these guys. So we showed you right there, John showed you Chris Christie's good answer, and it was a good answer. And as a parent, no, I don't want the government or Republican politicians deciding what to do with my kids.
Here's a question. I would like to hear Cenk Uygur talk about private schools. Private schools versus public schools. I'm interested in what his opinion on that is.
Hell no.
What his opinion on it is.
No way, under no circumstances. But the other three had horrific, barbaric answers. And they were all talking about like, oh, I banned people from, trans people from bathrooms. Oh, no, I banned them more. I banned them more. I hate them more. Look, you're the party of hate. Let's be honest about it. So do most Americans agree with them? No. In fact, on that bathroom bill, over 2/3 of Americans were on the side of transgender rights. They do. The great overwhelming majority of the country does not agree with the Republican hate mongers. But yet the Democrats don't seem to be able to fight back effectively or sometimes at all. So we've got to change that dynamic. Have you ever seen Joe Biden this animated about this issue? Or even any issue? Or even taking on Republicans? So look at Vivek Ramaswamy or Ramaslimey, just calling being transgender mental health disorder.
Damn.
Brother, you got a mental health disorder.
Damn.
And that disorder is not being able to tell the truth. You are the most fake, plastic, inauthentic person I have ever seen. Oh, Donald Trump was wrong about the election. Oh, I'm running and I want to kiss Donald Trump's ass. Oh, Donald Trump's right about everything. Now, why are you running against him? Okay, look, you see me saying harsh things about Joe Biden.
He said he's the best president of. He said he's the best president of a generation. If he's the best president of a generation, why are you running against him?
I think he's going to lose to Donald Trump. I'm positive. So we need someone else to run against Donald Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't look like he's in the race against Donald Trump at all. He looks like he's in the race to help Donald Trump. And by pushing hateful agendas like that, unfortunately, he is. So the Don't Say Gay bill, it's monstrous. I met a dad in Florida who's gay and has 2 kids. They couldn't put their picture up on the yearbook because it had a rainbow flag behind them in their house when they took the picture. And she couldn't write, his daughter couldn't write an essay about her dad because she had to talk about the fact that he's gay because it came up in terms of his partner. And the teachers are scared to death that their action is going to be taken against them if they allow that girl to write that essay. This is disgusting. It's hate. And we have to fight back. We can't just sit here and go, oh, yeah, you want to pass those bills? And they did. They passed dozens of bills in those states. So we need Democrats who don't mind fighting Republicans. It's not too much to ask for.
Marianne?
We need to do more than fight back. We need to remind Americans what this country is supposed to be about. You know, our Declaration of Independence, Abraham Lincoln said it is an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. To him, it was the whole purpose of the Civil War. The principle is that all men are created equal. All men have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments are instituted to secure those rights. That's the point of transgender Americans. They're American. God creates everybody. Everybody makes their own choices. That's supposed to be what America is about. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means, in today's language, self-actualization. People should be able to do whatever they want to do, fly as high as they want, soar, spread their wings, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And that's why transgenders must be protected. One of the first things I would do as president is confer special protection status on transgender Americans, because I am concerned.
Let's do a national gun buyback program, and then once we've gotten all the guns, we just give them to the transgenders. That's my policy.
They are a targeted group. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But we're not going to beat the Republicans just by fighting back. And we need to fight back in places. Like I said before, the left needs a spine. But at the same time, we're going to win by reminding America of what's possible. We have been trained to limit our imaginations, our political imaginations. We've been trained to farm out our best, most critical thinking. And that's why we can offer to the American people. And this.
Somebody in chat just said, low key, if I was president, the first thing I would do is fight for public option. Public option would be like #1 or #2 priority for sure. Healthcare is, I think, big victories on healthcare is such an easy sell. It is something that you can, I think, campaign on that nobody else is campaigning on. It seems like it's just like an open field right now where nobody's trying to pick up that mantle that much. Biden's doing a few things on policy, but they're not campaigning on it enough. But yeah, it's definitely, it seems like a wide open field, even though it's still like a top 5 issue for the majority of voters. I think top 3.
This is how we will win in 2024. Your life could be better. You could have universal health care. You could have a guaranteed living wage. You could have subsidized child care. You could have a Department of Peace. We could end America's drug war. We could have a Department of Children and Youth. We could have a mass mobilization to move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. Things could be better. That's how we are going to win in 2024. You know, Franklin Roosevelt said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivered on its promises. That's why we have the fascists so close to the door. They should never have gotten so close to the door. And when people say to Cenk and Dean and myself, how could you be doing this? Don't you know the fascists are at the door? We're doing this because the fascists are at the door. And all that Joe Biden is saying is, let me finish the job. That's no alternative to fascism. The alternative to fascism is an agenda that says your life could be so much better. Let's return to the basic principle. Let's return to government of the people, by the people, and for the people, repudiating overreach by corporate interests that have created this matrix of corporate tyranny. That's what the Democratic Party should stand for. The unequivocal, unabashed advocacy for the working people of the United States. That's what we should be doing, not just fighting them, but creating something new that really does harken back to the original principles, that reminds people what is possible in this country. What is the ideal?
Man, a Marianne Williamson presidency would release so many pretty leaflets
of this country, not just in the sense of what it gives you in terms of your rights, but in terms of all of our responsibilities to protect and to expand this extraordinary possibility that anyone should be able to thrive. And that means everyone in the world, but it certainly means everyone in the United States, including transgender, including no matter what your color, no matter what your sex, no matter what your sexuality, your gender, your religion. That's the point of the thing. And when people are re-inspired by that, that's when we will have a shot. And that's when we will course correct this nation.
Nicely said. Hear, hear.
Thank you.
We've talked about a number of different topics on this forum, and a number of different topics were raised during the Republican debate, but I noticed a few that didn't come up. They're minor issues, but some people are really into them, and apologies if they were briefly mentioned, but little things like mass shootings and gun violence, climate change, other than Vivek Ramaswamy using his literal closing remarks to ensure that we all know that he does not believe that it exists.
He does that every debate, every single debate. He always seems to wiggle in a climate change isn't real before the debate's over. The closing moments.
Wages. Infrastructure, including train derailments, Ukraine, other than constant discussion about the names of eastern provinces, which Mr. Ramaswamy, they're not provinces, they're oblasts.
Fuck, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Oblast is just the word for region. It's just the word for region. It's
Islamophobic hate crimes. There was a lot of talk about anti-Semitism, but not about Islamophobia. There was talk about Gaza, but no discussion of civilian deaths in Gaza. No discussion of the opioid epidemic outside of fentanyl contamination, and as a new...
I'm sorry, that's not... No. That's not a house, and then he just says house in German. Just
parent.
I'm sorry.
I thought maybe talking about paid family leave, considering how wildly popular it is, including amongst Republicans who support it at rates above 70%, would have made sense to me. So I want to turn to you, Cenk, first. Any of these topics or anything else that wasn't raised, what do you think was worthy of discussion?
Yeah, so this is exactly why we should have Democratic debates, because if the average American watched just the Republican debate tonight, they would probably think, oh my God, I guess the country hates gay people and trans people and wants to invade China and Mexico and Gaza, and they would have never heard the Democratic side. So here we've the points that we have made are so diametrically opposed.
Well, I mean, that's a good argument for having debates, period, where the left-wing side gets to be shown. That doesn't necessarily show the value of having specifically a presidential debate when you already have a nominee.
The points
I think you could say that's one device to do that.
What the Republicans have made. And by having this forum, we're at least getting that message out, which is exactly what we need to do. We invite Joe Biden to do it with us.
They got the message out here. Nah, I don't want to be that sassy. What are the comments on this like? I'm actually curious. Great conversation. What an amazing forum. I'm Canadian. Looks great. Well done. Great forum. Candidates are a lot more serious and principled than all the GOP candidates combined. Y'all make fine points. Okay.
So now in terms of those issues, look, paid family leave, you're a little wrong, John. It's not above 70%. Well, it is above 70%, but it's not in that ballpark. It's at 84%. 84%. So Estonia has 82 weeks off for moms who have babies. We have 0 days off.
Dude, when Trump ran on paid family leave in 2016 against Hillary, it's been 8 years. We're no closer to paid family leave. Trump and Hillary ran on it. Hillary just ran on more time for paid family leave. But of course, when Trump ran on it, it was fucking cynically. I don't know how cynical it would have been for Hillary, but it was extremely cynical for Trump. And we didn't get any movement during his presidency on it at all. Completely abandoned promise. I think he was just trying to outmaneuver Hillary.
Off 0 by law. We're the only nation, not only developed nation, almost the only nation on earth that doesn't have any paid family leave. And do you ever see the Republicans talking about that? No, because they serve corporate donors. And so do you know that 74% of Republican voters want paid family leave? Why? Yeah, they want moms to be able to have a baby and then to take 12 weeks off, or dads if the situation is appropriate. But we never discuss any of those issues. Instead, we talk about the maniacal issues that the Republicans bring up because they're the only ones having debates. And they're the only ones that are bringing up issues. We should be bringing up paid family leave. And then I've got to ask Joe Biden, my God, man, if you can't get a bill passed that's at 84% popularity, what can you get passed? Why don't you introduce it as a single issue bill in the Senate and embarrass and force the Republicans to vote against 3/4 of their own voters? But we get none of that. Always Democratic apathy and Republican aggression. It's time that we fought back. So I don't have time to go through the whole list that John said. I want to give the others time. But let's take the issue of climate change. Guys, we're running out of time. And these lunatics are talking about we're not giving the oil companies enough. Vivek Ramaswamy on the one hand says, oh, I'm against corruption. On the other hand, he says, no, we should let the oil companies take even more oil out and profit from it. And then when they have the cost of climate change, we should pay it. The taxpayers should pay it. Why don't they pay it? That's an externality of their business. That is a cost of their business. They should pay for it. Every time there's this extreme hurricane or tornado or whatever it might be caused by climate change, we should send the bill to ExxonMobil.
I'm sorry. I used to think that that Cenk was a much better orator than he's coming off to me now. It just kind of feels like he just gets loud. Is there anything like public speaking wise he does good besides ranting and getting loud? Like Alex Jones is like fun, and Cenk Uygur is kind of fun in the same way that Alex Jones is fun when you're getting like loud and like raging out. It's like, oh, ha. But outside of that, do you think his public speaking skills go far beyond that? He's passionate. Yeah, his passion is his main skill. I mean, not his main skill, but his main advantage.
And why are we giving $20 billion in subsidies to these companies? And one last thing here that is so important when it comes to climate change and oil prices. They have to stop lying about this in the Republican debates and sometimes in mainstream media. Our drilling, extra drilling, does not affect global gas prices. It is an international market. What we do is a drop in the bucket. And when we drill, it doesn't make us any more energy independent. We, the American citizens, don't get that oil. The corporations get the oil, and they can sell it anywhere in the world, and they do. It doesn't stay in America. It's one mythology after another. And finally, guys, I want you to think about this. The last month of the election, what if gas prices go up? Who's going to be blamed? The incumbent in charge is going to be blamed. Who is the one country that actually can affect oil prices worldwide? Saudi Arabia, because they control OPEC. And OPEC is large enough to move global oil prices. Who does Saudi Arabia love in America more than any other politician? Donald J. Trump. What if the Saudis increase gas prices right before the election? We're toast. We're toast. If the candidate is the incumbent president sitting at 30.
That is a real question that people don't toil with, I think, enough. About how people do try to apply extra pressure around election season in the United States. I mean, people talk about it a lot through the spreading of misinformation. It is not talked about enough about how the oil markets can be used to do the same thing.
7% favorability. And they move gas prices up right before the election. That guarantees Donald Trump a win. We cannot risk that. We cannot have.
I will say, though, a lot of times, I'm not saying it's impossible. Right. I'm just saying it's possible. But a lot of times people take a very America-centric viewpoint when looking at, oil and natural gas prices, where if something happens and it's strange or unusual or there's like some dip anytime around election season, people will throw that idea out there, especially if it's led by some group like OPEC Plus. But that isn't necessarily the case. I'm just saying that it's definitely possible.
Have this incumbent run this race. We're allowing ourselves to lose on purpose.
They're not going to do this again, are they? This is just like a one-time thing, right?
Never seen anything like it in my life.
Marianne, I want to go to you next. Which issue absence stood out the most to you?
That's a good question, though. Issue absence.
Well, I want to say something about what Cenk and Dean were just saying. I think we're all in agreement that we must not have Donald Trump back in the White House. But I don't think the biggest electoral risk for us as Democrats is Donald Trump. People who are going to vote for Donald Trump, they love Donald Trump. You could indict him 91 more times, and they'll still vote for him. They vote for him in prison. I don't think that our risk is so much Donald Trump as it is the risk of people staying home, millions of people staying home. And if we don't offer them anything more, then they just might, particularly when it comes to young people and the environment. This President Biden, okayed the Willow Project, the $8 billion ConocoPhillips oil extraction project on the North Slopes of Alaska. And he gave more oil drilling permits even than Trump did. So until we start offering policies, you were talking about paid family leave, and I certainly have that as part of my economic Bill of Rights. But the issue of paid family leave is not only just for the parents.
You know what? I'm very cynical about this. I'm very cynical when it comes to this electorally. I think any politician you put in the position of the presidency and then you give them a single energy crisis where they see their polling data dip 10 points because gas jumped $1 a gallon. I think from Bernie Sanders to Marianne Williamson to Brianna Joy Gray, you'd see a complete turnaround in oil and natural gas drilling. And I'm not even saying that's a good thing. I just think that type of just like the public reaction to a sudden change in markets is such a shock to a presidency. I think any of these people put under that type of public scrutiny, most of them would fold. Most of them would fold. I'm not saying all of them, but most of them would.
It's for the child. One of the things I want to do is establish a Department of Children and Youth. If we want the country that we could be in 20 years, we must start paying more attention to children 10 years and younger now. We know things about early childhood. That's when it all happens. 90% of a child's brain is developed in the first 5 years. So that's a large part of paid family leave. We have children who are traumatized in this country before preschool. We have elementary school students on suicide watch. In schools all over this country, we have trauma rooms. Why should childhood be such a trauma for millions of children in this country? We have millions of children in this country who go to schools where they don't even have the adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, the chances of high school graduation are drastically reduced, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is how we're going to win in 2024. Allow people to imagine a much better country, not just not them, but what we could create. What we could create for our children, what we could create for our families, what we could create for our communities, what we create for our health. Like Dean was saying, this is not just a matter of treating health. We must create proactively a more healthy society. For that, we must take on the food companies. We must take on the chemical companies. We must take on the environmental issues. 46% of all urban wells in the United States are filled with PFAS. So as long as we have the carcinogens in our food, as long as we have the toxins in our air, as long as we have the forever chemicals in our water, that's what I want to do. I want to picture for the American people that it could all be so much.
It's a good stump speech. I mean, is it okay stump speech? I just want to know how. I just always, like, at the end of one of these stump speeches, I'm just thinking how. Definitely from somebody. I think the thing that she needs to get across, definitely since she's never held public office before, is when she says do all these things that are like fun, populist, firebrand things to say, which anyone can come out and just say fun, popular things by looking up what's fun and popular. You gotta say, like, what's the plan to take on these companies? What's the plan? Do you have like an interesting legal theory you're going to try to base something off of to try to take them on with the courts? Or are you going to push a piece of legislation and you're going to stump for it through this new original way? The how should be so important to hear for somebody with zero political experience. People with zero political experience should be doubly expected to explain how they're going to get these things through the houses of Congress, because they have something to make up for, and that's a lack of experience in how the government works, how the system works, how the levers and knobs work, which, I mean, after 4 years of Trump, we saw what that can lead to.
Better. We're going to have to repudiate corporate dominance, and we're going to have to start again. And that's what the Democrats should stand for. And if we do, we will win in 2024. Because, of course, people just want a better life.
Representative Phillips?
Well, there's so much. Childcare, early childhood education, my goodness. The fact that they didn't spend more time or any time talking about the need for a legitimate mental and emotional health care system in the United States that would address so many of the challenge from cradle to grave. The fact that they didn't talk about Social Security, which is literally going to start trimming benefits by 25% within 10 years if we don't address it. By the way, we should raise the cap to $250,000. I'd like to see a pool created so that those who have been successful can return their Social Security benefits to a pool that would be redistributed to the lowest, perhaps 10% of recipients, many of whom literally are having to make sandwiches at night and eat cereal because they just don't have enough money at the end of the month. It's just abhorrent. There's so much that needed to be talked about tonight that wasn't. We talked about gun violence, of course, we talked about everything that young people are coming to all of us to talk about: gun violence, climate change. No mention, I don't think, of the AI revolution that is forthcoming, a country that is so woefully ill-prepared for both the blessings and the curses. And I'll tell you what I think needs to be talked about more than anything else, because no matter what policies we stand for, what we want to achieve,
this is your
if we don't start focusing on national repair, literally repair, we have a dysfunctional Congress. We have a disaster brewing around this country and no peace around the world. And if we don't bring peace to the world and to our country and don't unify behind that, and frankly, make invitations, not confrontations, but invitations to Donald Trump supporters, as both of you have mentioned tonight, have the same challenges, the same needs, the same anger.
I always wonder, when you have this like long time to do a stump speech and you go point after point after point after point, I wonder if it's more helpful to just go boom, boom, boom. And this is something I'm leaning more towards. Just quick, punchy, like just stick to your main points and be done with it, rather than going on and on and on and on and on, because it feels like the points are getting diluted. And I'm feeling that
many of us have about a system that is absolutely destroying many of the facets of the country that are so dear to us.
By the way, this is a point I'm coming to from self-reflection. I do want to emphasize that.
So we've got a lot of work to do. The fact is, I love what you said, Cenk, about the fact that absent the President of the United States consenting to at least a couple of debates, we are literally giving free airtime to the very party that is going to seize back the White House and completely destroy democracy. So you know what? I was asked yesterday if I thought President Biden was a risk to democracy. And I said, yes, he is, because he's running in a race in which he's going to lose to the most dangerous man in history. He's not consenting to debates, handing literally every screen in America to millions of people watching every day. He's allowing the Florida Democratic Party and the North Carolina Democratic Party to literally make a decision for probably 10 million Americans that they don't need to vote. We'll make the decision for you, and simply hand his delegates to him and not even allow our voters to go to the polls. And then, of course, in New Hampshire, I mean, it's appalling. He took the first in the nation primary away, told them their votes won't matter, and now is trying desperately to do a write-in campaign and have, along with a super PAC up here, to do it. You know, the dirty truth is we've got a massive disaster in both parties right now. I was part of it. I enabled it. I had no idea until I joined both of you in this endeavor. And I think that's the most important part of this so far, is to speak truth to power, to say the quiet part out loud. And my goodness, watching that GOP debate tonight.
Look, I want to throw this out there. I think it'd be better if there was a good, clean, fair Democratic primary and Republican primary and primary generally, no matter if there was an incumbent or not an incumbent presidents every year. I wish that was the state of affairs. That isn't the state of affairs. And when we say that Joe Biden is a threat to democracy, and then we say Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and we just use those two words to compare those people, I do think that we're kind of diluting the point here. There's a difference between somebody saying, I'm not going to participate in the debates, and I already won the incumbency, I'm not going to take part in the primary process this year, and I'm going to suspend the U.S. Constitution because I lost the election. There's a big gap there. And so while I do think that Joe Biden's position on the Democratic primary is wrong, freedom isn't a zero-sum game here, and we should be careful when using that type of language.
It was horrifying. And to watch the only person in the room who tried to play the role of an adult, that was Chris Christie. He was the guy that was doing debate prep, for God's sakes, with Donald Trump just a couple years ago.
That's true.
Give me a damn break. You know what I mean? Give me a break. And Nikki Haley, who's now the number 2 closest, you know, her hand went up right away when they asked him last time in the debate stage if you would still vote for Donald Trump, even if he's convicted. Even if he's convicted, my goodness, folks, I'm glad to be on this with all of you because we still have some principle left in politics. And now we need the platform to ensure the country sees it. And right now the president is working against it.
Well, thank you for that. I think I can speak for the network that, this has been a great forum. We would be interested perhaps in future follow-up forums or debates. If anybody watching is interested in that, feel free to use your voice. But I want.
So when does the debate start?
I want to finish with just one more question, very similar to the way that the debate actually finished. And this will be brief, but it's incredibly serious. Marianne, I want to ask you what they were all asked. Who do you draw inspiration from?
Franklin Roosevelt. Absolutely. He said a necessitous man is not a free man. We have the highest poverty rate of any advanced democracy, including child poverty. He also talked about not only freedoms to, but also freedoms from. Freedom from want and freedom from fear. The Democratic Party should be the conscience of the nation. Too many people are suffering. And Eleanor Roosevelt said to Franklin Roosevelt, we need more.
See, this is why I couldn't run for office. I'd be too cheeky and say something stupid like George Soros or something because I think it was funny, and I'd sink the campaign.
More than the amelioration of stress, we need fundamental economic reform. Even the president, he wants to ameliorate people's stress, but he'll always stop just before it would actually be challenging that profit motive of those corporate donors upon which he depends. We need fundamental economic reform, an economic bill of rights, unabashed return, course correction, so that like in the 1970s, when we had an actual thriving middle class, the average American has a sense that they too have a shot at the American dream. The American dream for a lot of people right now is to get out of debt before they die. Mm-hmm. We have to change that, and that's what the Democratic Party should stand for. To me, that's what Roosevelt stood for. He believed that government should be used, just as in the Declaration of Independence, to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And also in that declaration, it says that if government's not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter that. So Roosevelt, Roosevelt, Roosevelt for me.
Representative Phillips, who do you draw inspiration from?
I'll tell you, when it came to resisting Donald Trump, I draw inspiration from my two daughters who woke up the morning after the 2016 election, both in tears. And I promised them at the breakfast table I would do something. And I decided to run for Congress and flipped a district that had been in Republican hands for 60 years, since 1958, and beat a man who had won by 14 points the night before. So my daughters inspired me to resist and participate. My father, my birth father, Artie Peffer, was a captain in the U.S. Army, was killed in action in Vietnam in 1969 when I was 6 months old. My inspiration for peace is because of my dad. And I'll tell you that I think the most important is what I just said a moment ago, which is I think national repair, to bring this country back together, to bring peace to the world. Whenever I'm traveling around on the campaign trail, I ask young people, if they had a magic wand, what would you do? And I was at the Laconia Pumpkin Festival here in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and a young person I asked that question of, and she didn't want to answer right away. And I asked her again, and she said, if I had a magic wand, I would just ask people in school to be nicer to me. And I thought, you know what, of all the people I've spoken with on this whole journey so far, all the people, nothing was more inspirational than that moment. And I think we should all give a little bit of thought to that as I watched that debate stage tonight and thought about...
Chat, who's your inspiration, okay? Mine's Courage the Cowardly Dog, okay? What's your inspiration, chat?
Those people, how mean-spirited, the lack of compassion, the lack of decency, talking over each other, so disrespectful. That young person at the Laconia Pumpkin Festival, I'll tell you right now, is inspiring me more than any other American. Let's just be a little bit more decent. Let's be a little more thoughtful. And we Democrats, let's be a little bit more strong. And we got to mobilize. We got to energize. And most of all, let's lead with optimism. It's time for hope. Let's not be destroyed in fear and destroy each other in the pursuit of political power, because we're going to do that if we don't get our act together. And by the way, all those who waited or are waiting until 2028, they're not meeting the moment. They're waiting for themselves. And I'm just proud to be here with all of you, people who have courage to step up. And I hope everybody watching who's paying attention and knows what's at risk, spread that courage around the country right now, not just to Democrats, independents, and also Republicans, the thoughtful, principled ones who recognize what's at stake. So I just want to thank you all. It's been an honor to be with you.
Thank you. And Cenk, we'll end with you. Where does your inspiration come from?
Right.
I just felt awash in thoughtful, principled Republicans recently. I just felt so awash in them. I see them everywhere.
Double down.
There's a few
On what both
I don't see many of them.
Marianne and Dean said. First, on Marianne, not only did FDR do economic bill of rights that changed this country forever and protected our system and looked out for the average man, but he actually fought Republicans, and he liked fighting Republicans. He said they had a lust for greed, and that he wasn't going to allow it. And he said that he welcomed their hatred. Now, that's what a strong Democratic president who delivered looks like. Every time Biden starts a speech, he talks about his Republican friends and how much he likes them. That is not the winning strategy. You've got to be able to fight back. Okay, but the person I draw inspiration from and the group is one I talk about on the show all the time. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders like Bayard Rustin. They were amazing. So what did they do? They created good trouble.
Yeah, I'd be scared to say MLK, man. I feel like I picked like a basic. It's like a basic answer. Does that sound bad for me to say? That sounds like a basic answer. Like, who's your inspiration, Dylan? Martin Luther King, of course. Like, I don't know why that feels almost like corny. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like I like had to think one up on the spot, almost. I'm not afraid of Martin Luther King. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. That is not what I meant. Who would I pick? Who would I pick? Inspiration. Lyndon B. Johnson, but specifically the private angry version of him.
Their job was to create enough trouble to draw attention to the injustices so that we could fight back against the injustices. But what did they do with it? They didn't just fight fire with fire. They fought hatred with love. But they didn't do it in a meek way. They did it in a beautifully aggressive way. That's why it was called good trouble. And not only did it press LBJ to the brink, which caused LBJ to press the Dixiecrats to the brink to get Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act passed, but when the time came, he was practical and took the victory. If we can get that right balance, then the Democratic Party would be in terrific shape. And I want to end on agreeing with Dean. Guys, we need hope in this country. And so often the Democratic answer is there was nothing we could do. I don't accept that. And so in this race, Dean's again right that in a lot of the people that were the Democratic governors, et cetera, they were worried about how they were going to position themselves for 2028. This is not the time for that. Democracy is actually on the line. And Biden is so far down. He's down 15 points from where he was.
Again,
and Donald Trump now
numbers,
up 8 points, and he needs to lose by 5. So these are terrible, terrible numbers. But we've got to have hope that we can win and that we could fight back and have the side and the forces of justice win out at the end. And how do you get that hope? By all of us working together and saying, yes, there is a way that we can get a much, much stronger Democratic candidate and go take the fight to the Republicans and to Donald Trump. And yes, do it with love and hope in our hearts so that we can win together, not just for Democratic voters, but for the whole country. I want to thank Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson for participating in this too. And guys, it's an honor to be in the race with you guys because, if you asked me to name 2 Democrats who had the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most, I'd name you 2.
It's a nice, positive, unified note to end on, but I do want to give each of you an opportunity to direct people watching to more information about your candidacy. Cenk,
I do think I don't know, man, I gotta say, Cenk seems genuine. This doesn't seem like a grift or anything. This does seem genuine. I do think still it's a terrible idea. I don't think he's a good candidate. I don't think he should be running. I think if he really, I think it would make much more sense for him just to endorse Marianne. If this was a priority of his, but I don't think he's faking it. I don't think this is just all for money or something.
And so that one's easy.
I can see it in his eyes. Is that a bad justification for that? That I can see it in his eyes? But I can see it in his eyes.